Well, thank you so much for joining us on this fabulous day. I never take for granted that you choose to spend your valuable time here with us, and we always make sure we try and deliver so that it is worthwhile for you. And today, I think you're in for a real treat. We're going to have a very interesting, unique kind of show. Going to be chatting today with Jane Korosi about negotiating as a crisis negotiator. So welcome, Jane. It is so exciting to have you here.
Oh, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, I've been really looking forward to this conversation. I think your background is just so unique and our listeners can get a lot of value from this. So those of you who may not know her, for the past 33 years, Jane's worked in a very male-dominated field of corrections, 27 of them in maximum security facility for male offenders. She's also had experience working at both medium and minimum security and also with female offenders. And during her career, she's held various frontline positions, including correctional officer, security intelligence officer, unit manager, correctional manager. She's worked basically in every area from admissions and discharge to segregation with offenders through all the security levels. And for 20 years, I thought it was over 20 years actually, Jane also served as both a team member and a leader of their critical incident stress management team and the employee assistance program. And she was a member of the Honor Guard, and she is especially proud of being selected as a crisis negotiator. So as you can tell, Jane comes to us with some incredible, really unique experiences in the negotiating realm. And I can't wait to pick her brain here today with and for you. So kickstart us off, Jane. Like, how did you come to do this work? This is a pretty unusual choice, I'd say, for most women in particular.
It wasn't by design or by goal. I basically fell into it. It was the end of the 80s, going into the beginning of the 90s. Employment equity had just kicked in. Interest rates were high. There were plant closures and layoffs. My husband was in manufacturing, so we lived the manufacturing curve, most of our for whatever. So, and it was a time that was really changing for everyone, where you went from, being a stay-at-home mom to maybe you got a little something on the side for some extra pin money, as they used to say. And then went from there to suddenly, being a major contributor, if not the major breadwinner, based on situations. And, it's actually kind of funny because when I did start my training to be a correctional officer, I remember one of my peers, a male, had said to me that, it was because of females like me that white Anglo-Saxon guys like him get jobs. And I said to him, it's because I'm married to one of you white Anglo-Saxon guys that I have to get this job.
Oh my gosh, you're bringing out some blasphemy about pin money. I haven't heard that in a while.
Yeah,
That brings back memories. And you're right. Gosh, it's funny. We still have a long way to go, but we forget, I think, sometimes how far we've come, because that was a very common sentiment, that how dare you be taking a job that a male can be having. So now you, as I said in the intro, you were chosen as a crisis negotiator, which I can imagine was super exciting. But I'd love first if you could tell us was there any particular crisis management training that you felt was the most effective or had the greatest impact on you?
Yeah, so I've done a number of trainings with corrections throughout my entire career, and they've done some really unique and amazing training courses, and we sometimes do them with colleagues from across the country at different training facilities. And some of the greatest people I've ever met are in corrections, and it's a shame that the field isn't recognized more. It's kind of like the forgotten stepchild under the stairs, nobody wants to really talk about it or even recognize that it exists. But anyway, getting off topic.
Yeah, no, that's a good point, actually. And don't be afraid to put in a pin like that, because we love to talk about things and raise awareness for people. And to be honest, I hadn't thought of that until you just said it right now, that, the police, firefighter, first responders, everybody else in the sort of corrections field, if you will, or the criminal justice system, all have a certain status or recognition, and corrections you rarely hear about. So
Yeah, that's very, very true. You know, everybody, when the crimes are being committed, everyone is watching intently as the investigation goes on. They arrest someone and everyone follows who were they? Why did they do
Yeah.
this? What's the backstory? And then there's the trial, which, you know, may be
Yeah.
interesting, and the sentencing, and then they go away.
Yeah.
And people in corrections have to deal with these people sometimes for the next 30, 40
Yeah.
years. Nobody ever thinks about it. It's once they're behind bars, that's it. It's the
Yeah. It's
story's
like job
story.
done, head in
Yeah,
the
the
sand, don't want to know
really,
anything about it.
yeah, and really the story hasn't even begun. So
Yeah.
it's it's interesting that as society we have that concept, but you know,
Yeah.
there it is.
Yeah, no, thanks for that. And I went and took you off track. You were telling us about one of the
Oh,
trainings in particular that you
right.
had that had impacted
So the training that I did that had the most impact on me, shall we say, was a training that I did when I first became a correctional manager. So when you're a correctional manager, you are the interim crisis manager when an incident takes place, and you are also the warden's delegate, as it were, until he comes on site and, should he decide, takes over as the
Yeah.
crisis manager, which just changes the whole dynamic again.
Yeah.
But anyway, so at that time, which is quite a long time ago, there used to be a training facility and they'd bring people in from around the country. And so there were wardens there, deputy wardens, there were team leaders for the emergency response team leaders,
Yeah.
and crisis negotiators, and the correctional managers. So what they would do is they would set up crisis centers, and they were actually testing the wardens at that time.
Mm.
And they'd set up a scenario where there would be the crisis center with the warden with all his people surrounding him, and they would have two different rooms going simultaneously, and then one group that was enacting the actual crisis. And it was kind of funny because at the time they used to say the big bang scenario, the grand finale,
Yeah.
was for all of the managers from Max, because they said that we made the best inmates.
That's funny.
So there was a scenario, it was a hostage taking, it was in a shop. So the wardens and the negotiators are both gathering information, you know, sending their negotiator down,
Yeah.
you know, and trying to, and this was one of those scenarios that was never meant to be a win. The
Oh,
question is more, how high are the losses?
okay. Wow.
Because sometimes you can't win.
Yeah.
So anyway, so they had these, I was playing an inmate, and what happened was, based on decisions that were made, based on information from the negotiators that went back to the crisis centers, the outcomes of these scenarios were completely different based on the negotiation and based on the information and decisions that were made. And it was very impactful to me to see these two things happening simultaneously
Yeah.
and how the outcome could change. Like I said, there
Yeah.
was a win, but the extent of the
Yeah.
loss is,
Yeah, I was just going to say that is a great, and I don't know that I've seen that very often, if at all. I'm thinking where you see firsthand, because it's true. It's kind of like that movie Sliding Door. Like if we go one direction in negotiation, it takes us down a whole course versus every choice we make ends in a ripple of, possibly infinite number of different outcomes. So that I can see why that would have been so impactful, seeing face to face. Okay, these two different approaches led to dramatically different results.
it's all about information, because
Yeah,
the information is critical when you're making decisions and when you're relaying information. And you know, skipping over a piece of information as insignificant, or
yeah,
putting too much emphasis on a detail, is can both cause major.
yeah,
So it's not that you have to notice everything, it's you have to be able to notice what might be important
Yeah.
later,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
it's a totally different, I know you mostly deal with mediation, negotiation, those types of things. Crisis negotiation is not the same. It's
Yeah.
similar, use similar techniques, but it's very different.
Yeah. Although it's interesting because as you're saying that, I mean, the lessons are the same in large part, right? I mean, you're talking about that information, being able to, through a combination of intuition and careful listening and asking the right questions to be able to get all the information that you need to be making the most sound decisions. And I want to really put a pin for our listeners out there as well, because something you said, Jane, really struck with me. And that's about, hey, there isn't really a win here. And we are so conditioned to think about negotiations as a win or a lose, as if there's some magical button you push and this one gives you a win and that one gives a lose. Whereas, as you're just saying, there's a whole host of possible outcomes. And in any given case, we're trying, one would hope, to get the best outcome. So I love it. It's about getting away from that win-lose mindset and just be thinking differently about what is the best outcome that we can achieve for everyone here. I think that's a really great lesson. And do you mind sharing an example of maybe one of your most challenging negotiations in your career and maybe what you learned from it?
I've done negotiations that one-on-one with inmates in barricade situations or inmates engaged in self-harm. I have also done negotiations with large numbers of inmates, up to 200, who are barricaded in a yard or a gym area. So everyone is different. Everyone
Yeah,
is important. Everyone, affected people's lives.
yeah.
So to pick or choose, I'm not sure. I will tell you one sort of comical aspect.
Okay.
So it was one of those spontaneous things where a group of inmates decided that they weren't going to leave the gym.
Yeah.
And so negotiated with them for most of the night, trying to get them
Yeah.
to leave. So at one point, I said, and they had no plan. This just kind of happened.
Spontaneous removal.
Yeah, yeah, as it were. They had like really no demands.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think they were, they made a stand and now they were stuck with it,
Yeah.
for lack of a better word.
Yeah.
So I remember saying to them at one point, what is it going to take to get you guys to just come in?
Yeah.
Like you've made your point. What's it going to take? And
Yeah.
I'll never forget the one young lad looked at me and he said, you dye your hair blue, we'll come in. And I was like, seriously? And so anyway, so I went up and I told the warden what they had said. And
Yeah.
he looked at me seriously and said, so would you consider it? So like that's how outrageous and
Yeah.
silly it can be, but it's not outrageous and it's
No.
not.
Yeah. Well, I love that. So is that how you ended up coming to get your purple hair?
No, no, that was a bet I lost with my grandson, because he said if he got a mohawk that, I had to dye my
Uh,
hair purple. And I guess I don't know my son as well as I think I do, because I thought there's no way he will ever allow that.
yeah.
So
That
there,
is funny. Well, also proves my point that all of life is a negotiation, right down to negotiating with the grandkids, with our kids, and the same principles again, right? You made an informed, guess based on what you expected the behavior of your son to be, and it wasn't, as so often happens in life, right? Right, from the small things to the crisis management, and a couple of other things that you said about that sort of funny incident, I think have a lot of ripple effect as well, and like sometimes when we negotiate, we back ourselves in a corner, like these guys did, right? Like they made that stand. I forget how you worded it, but it was like they made their stand and then they were stuck with it. And again, for our listeners, I invite you to think, how often have you put yourself in that position where you went down a road full hog and there wasn't really any reason for it, no rationale, and what common sense prevailed, you didn't need it, but you felt like you'd backed yourself in a corner. So I love that. And also humor can be a great reliever in these situations. So what did happen? Did you dye your hair blue? How did you end up resolving it?
no, no. The other thing that you have to recognize in crisis negotiation is that you really have three roles when you're doing these negotiations. So one of the most important we already talked about is you're gathering information.
Yeah.
You're seeing what's there, what's around, who's involved, trying to identify who the leader or decision maker
Yeah.
is, because it's never the person that comes forward.
Hmm. Smart,
So,
interesting. Yeah.
so, that's part of what you're doing. In a perfect world, you're negotiating to a good resolution for everyone that's going to end the situation.
Yeah.
So you can get back to some sense of
Yeah.
normalcy, or the new normal, as we
Yeah.
like to say. But basically, a lot of the time, you are basically stalling for time and buying time so that the things that are happening in the background, because obviously you can't let a group of inmates take over a yard or a
Yeah.
gym. And, you have to maintain control.
Yeah.
So oftentimes that leads to a decision to be taken where there's going to be some sort of intervention. So you're gathering information so that they can prepare for that
Yeah.
intervention. And also you're buying time for the intervention. Also, when you're actually doing it, you have a code word that if you say that word, that they know it's go time, which means like you need to like go now. So there's more to it than negotiation. I think there's a lot of times you're buying time or you're wearing them down. I mean,
Yeah.
most times time is on your side. They're in a
Yeah.
confined area. They
Yeah.
know they're not going to win per se.
Yeah.
It's not a fair fight. It's
Yeah.
not a,
Yeah.
we're supposed to win. That's
Yeah.
that's how it goes. But yeah, so a lot of
Yeah.
time you're wearing them down, you're buying time,
Yeah.
you're doing those kinds of
Yeah.
things.
Which is also part of the negotiation,
And
right? I
it's
mean,
a
call,
very
call it
important
strat.
part of it.
Yeah, I mean, call it strategy, call it tactics, whatever. I mean, it's all definitely part of it. Okay, so one, you're gathering information, and and you're sometimes having a stall time, etc. So you were saying about those three roles. What was the other?
Yeah. So the other would be to actually come to a resolution where
Yeah.
everybody can, so
Yeah.
yeah, so you're gathering information, you're buying time, and sometimes you're lucky enough that you're able to come to some sort of
Yeah.
resolution. You
Yeah.
have to remember, in the role of a crisis negotiator, you are not a decision maker.
Mm,
And that's
yeah.
very, very important.
Yeah.
So everything is, that you will take the information back. You got to talk to you talk
Yeah.
to your people, I'll talk to my people.
Yeah.
And there's that whole, and also, you know, oftentimes when you do that, you set deadlines and you
Yeah.
start small and go bigger. Whereas it's like, okay, I need you guys to, just stay calm and everybody just be cool. And it's going
Yeah.
to take me like 20 minutes.
Yeah.
And then if they can make that first deadline,
Yeah.
you have a chance to stretch it out a little longer.
Yeah.
And
You said something there that I think is really worth sort of putting a pin in as well. When you'd said that when you're looking for who's in charge or who's the leader, and it's
Mhm.
often not the person who's speaking. I'm so glad you raised that, Jane, because we are so conditioned. We always assume the person who's the spokesperson, the one who's talking the loudest, is the person who's sort of leading the negotiation, if you will. And that's not always the case. Even in business, I see people so often make that mistake at the negotiating table, right? Whether it's collective bargaining negotiations, multi-million-dollar deals, or otherwise. You're better look to the person that everybody's looking to, right? It's not necessarily the person who's speaking, but you're looking to if you're looking for the cues and being really aware situationally of it, it's seeing as you're watching across, who are people subtly looking at for that approval, for that nod, for the reaction or whatever. Has that been your experience too?
Yes, yes. And I mean, one of your goals would be to bring that person to the forefront.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's such a great point.
That's a major win if you can get that person
Yeah.
come forward,
Yeah.
because now you're dealing with, a major stakeholder
Yeah.
who can make the decision, and their word sort of rules
Yeah.
what's going to happen. When you have to wait for them to
Yeah.
go and talk to that person, that's when everybody else gets to interject their opinions,
Yeah.
and it can be a little dicey. So
Yeah.
when you're talking to someone who has the power,
Yeah.
you're in a much more powerful
Yeah.
position.
Yeah, so important. And let's talk about the elephant in the room for a moment. I mean, corrections and crisis negotiation are both, extremely male dominated industries. So would you say, in hindsight with 3 decades behind here, was being female an asset or a liability or a bit of both? What's your view on that?
I think it was a bit of both. I mean, you have to recognize we can't get away from our genders. We're
Yeah,
never going to be 100% equal. We all have strengths
yeah,
and weaknesses, and the trick is to act as a team where we use each other's strength and weaknesses. So, for example, if I have a range that's refusing to lock up, and I'm just, your average officer at this
yeah,
point, for me to go to the front of the barrier and say, "Okay, guys, that's enough. Like, you need to lock up, and you need to lock up
yeah,
now," comes across one way. You get a guy who's 6'4"
yeah,
and bulked up, and he stands at the front of the range and says, "All right, guys, that's enough. It's time to lock up now." The message is received
yeah,
somewhat differently, but don't get me wrong. I love to have those guys behind
yeah,
me
yeah.
for sure. I mean, there's times when, you know, strength and weight and all that
Yeah,
does make a difference, but I found I don't have that. So I had to use this. I
yeah.
had to, think. And I think part of the reason why I had a reputation of they used to call me a con whisperer. So
That's a compliment.
yeah. But I think the reason why I sort of fell into that was because I was female, because when guys were refusing to
Ah,
come in, when somebody was barricaded in their cell, when any of those things were happening, they would say, "You go down and talk to them. You can listen to them.
yeah,
I don't want to hear them."
yeah,
And so it just kind of, and I think there's still some belief to the fact, and trust me, that you cannot count on this, but they tend to listen more to an older female. They all have
yeah,
raised by their mothers, their
yeah,
grandmothers.
yeah,
Like there's still that tiny little bit of,
yeah,
I don't mean to say by any stretch of the imagination, like they'll punch me in the head just as quick, but if there's a
yeah,
6'4" guy beside me, he's
yeah,
going to take the first hit because there's no glory in hitting me.
yeah.
No, it's all
Yeah,
about status. It's all about reputation.
yeah, yeah. Well, and it's interesting as you say that because I mean, a bunch of things are jumping out at me to say, and this is so great, Jane. I'm loving this conversation. One is about listening, right? We don't listen well in North America. And I think things are shifting now away from sort of gender attributes, but I think it's fair to say women historically have had to listen more and be better listeners because we had so few rights, right? We had to count, we couldn't vote, we couldn't hold our property in our own name. So we listen, which is such an important skill in negotiation. But I do think there is something, and somebody else had raised this with me before I wrote my book once about this, why women are received differently and you talked about that, because it's not just about the messaging, it's about how that messaging is received. And there's a host of factors that affect that. And we ignore that so often when we're going into a negotiation. How is who I am going to be received by the other? And is there something I can do to tweak that in this negotiation? But that maternal thing, whether it's justified or not, there's this subconscious sort of assumption that there's this nurturing quality there, which gives a different tone to a negotiation. And that's not to say all mothers are great nurturers or that all women are, but we are so socially conditioned to believe that. So what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think there's a lot to be said for that. There's also, I think I saw this a lot in my career, and I'm sure that you've probably seen it too. Everyone has. When males are confronted, they are actually blow themselves up. The
Yeah.
chest goes out, the
Yeah.
stature changes, everything. I do that and I look like an idiot. Like really, you know what I mean? I learned early in my career, I cannot mimic them. I
Yeah.
cannot be them because I look ridiculous.
Yeah.
And also you have to, it's hard to be a woman in a position of power because as soon as you become authoritative,
Yeah.
you're automatically labeled a bitch.
Yeah.
Like it's,
It's so true. Yeah. Yeah. And we think that's changing, but we still got a long way to go. And
yeah,
that touches for me something else too, which is So many people try to adopt a style even in negotiations that they've seen somebody else use. And like you say, whether it's that puffing yourself up and then it looks ridiculous on certain people, right? Or versus, and it's so important to find the style that is natural for you so that you're showing up as authentically as possible. Because I mean, I don't know what your experience was sort of in corrections and beyond, but people are going to resonate much more with authenticity than somebody who's posturing or putting out vibes trying to be something other than what they are. What are your thoughts on that?
I think so. And I think that maybe it's, you know, I don't stand for all women by any stretch of the imagination. And so these comments are, you know,
Yeah,
about me
yeah,
personally. But I found that one of the greatest strengths that I had was, like you say, the act of listening, because
yeah.
a lot of times they just don't think they're being heard. And oftentimes that
Mhm.
is true.
Yeah,
So I learned to let them ramble, ramble, ramble,
yeah,
go on and on and on. And I don't say a word until
yeah,
they start to repeat themselves.
yeah,
Because if you haven't let them finish what they have to say, they're not listening to
yeah,
you.
yeah,
Their mind is finishing all the arguments that they want to make. So
yeah,
they're not listening. They're planning what they're going to say next. So you
yeah,
have to wait till they basically wind down.
yeah,
And then at that point, you do have a little bit of a control, because when you do start speaking and they try to intercede, you can say to them, you know, I listened to everything you had to say. So, you know, could
yeah,
you show me this the same respect so that we can, so listening is huge,
yeah,
because, you know, where everything that you do is being restricted and controlled,
yeah,
they often don't feel that they have a
yeah.
voice.
It's funny because that's, I think, so important in that setting. Oh my gosh. I mean, amplified, exponentially. And I think the point that you're making applies across the board, Jane, as you're saying that. I mean, at its core, as humans, we all just want to be seen and heard, right? We want to feel valued and respected. And when we talk over each other, when we don't listen, it's not surprising that most negotiations just end up going off in directions that could have been avoided, right? There could have been a better outcome sitting there if the parties just showed each other the respect of letting the other person be seen and be heard and feel valued in the conversation, even and especially when you disagree. I love that. Now, what would you say the difference is? Because corrections is kind of unique in that you're one of the few, if only agencies where those negotiations are face to face. Most
Right.
crisis negotiations are done at a distance, right? You see it on the TV with the megaphone or the phone calls or whatever. Talk to us just for a minute about that. Like what difference does that make in your view?
Well, face to face changes things dramatically, because it's not like you're talking over the phone and you've got 10 other people listening into the conversation and, you know, giving you notes and
Yeah.
telling you what you should do. We always have a partner when we negotiate, and that person basically listens and watches for things that we may not notice
Yeah.
because we're involved in the conversation. And it's important that you focus on the person that you're talking to.
Yeah.
So we always do have another person with us. Only one person does the talking, the other person doesn't.
Yeah.
But that's why, again, the information part is so huge, because
Yeah.
you you don't have anyone else critiquing you or giving you ideas or whatever. The only time you get information is when you leave
Yeah.
and, you know, go and relay information. You may get some additional information at that time.
Yeah.
But I think it's important, and I didn't mention it before, so I'm going to throw it in now, is that oftentimes what people are complaining about or what they're on about is not the primary problem here. So
That's
you
true.
spend a lot of time trying to find what is the true underlying issue.
Yeah.
Because the fact that they felt that the meal was inedible tonight is not really what's
Yeah.
causing them to act out to such a degree.
Yeah.
There's something else going on. So you have to be careful not to get sidetracked into the void of what they're
Yeah.
initially telling you, because it's only a symptom. It's
Yeah.
not the reason. And if you can't get to the core reason, you
Yeah.
can't have, you know, an open dialect.
Oh my gosh, that is such a brilliant insight. And it is amazing how often that's overlooked, right? And again, it's so interesting. I'm smiling because to me, as you're talking about these high stakes negotiations, right? And intense situations, and yet those principles apply, whether like what you just described, how often does that happen when we're negotiating with our kids even, right? What they're
Right.
having the tantrum about isn't really the issue. And we always get so focused on the darn tantrum and the media that we miss the bigger issue. Same with our intimate partners. My God, I'm embarrassed myself even as a negotiator to think sometimes about the massive blowouts we've had because neither party was looking beneath the surface of what was being
Right.
said. And business deals, the same thing. So let's talk just, I can't, this is so interesting. I can't believe how quick our time is going here. I want you to touch on mindset for a moment. Like, I often say that negotiating our own mindset is one of our biggest and most important negotiations, certainly the first one. So do you have any advice for negotiating our mindset so we can show up more powerfully when we're about to embark on a challenging negotiation, whether a crisis situation like yours or even in our listeners in their personal lives?
I think you have to keep your mind open
Yeah.
because a lot of times we go into situations, negotiations, whatever, and we too are stuck in what, and we're forecasting what that person's going to say before they even open their
Yeah.
mouth, and we've already prepared our arguments, and you know and we're so focused on ourselves and what's going through our minds and what we think is supposed to happen or should happen,
Yeah.
that we lose where we are. The other thing is composure. you know we use,
Nice.
never let them see you sweat, that kind
Yeah.
of thing, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
They say that dogs can, they're like dogs, they can smell fear,
Yeah.
all those sort of sayings, right?
Yeah.
And so, especially when you're doing face to face, whether it's across a boardroom table or whether between barriers, you really have to control your emotions
Yeah.
because they're looking for weakness as
Yeah.
well, or looking for a crack. And,
Yeah.
an interesting thing that I learned was never ask them why.
Hmm.
Why is confrontational. If
Yeah.
I say, why are you doing that, Cindy?
Yes.
You get defensive,
Yeah.
right?
That's very true.
So little cues like that, but I think, once you show emotion, once you crack the veneer, you've already lost.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think I think if you have to, the best thing to do is, you know, to withdraw from the situation, to give yourself time to gain that composure, because you cannot let it get personal. And
Yeah.
it's, for them, it's very personal.
Yeah.
For me, I'm not going to lose my house. I'm
Yeah.
not going to lose my job. I'm
Yeah.
not going to be, you know,
Yeah.
unless they're destitute.
Yeah.
But for them, it's
Yeah.
very, very important. It doesn't matter what it is. You can't minimize their truths,
Yeah.
whether they be true
Yeah.
or not. But
And they have so little control that, and often I find when people feel like they do not have a lot of control, whether it's somebody, in a psychiatric institution, whether you're in, the correction system, in certain business situations, you've got to allow for that as well, to be able to, again, let them feel seen and heard, because they're going to be much more reactive in situations where they feel they have no control.
you can never back them into
Yes.
a corner. I mean, if you back or trap any
Yeah.
creature, they're going to fight. But
Yeah.
given the opportunity to escape,
Yeah.
the majority will take that
Yeah.
opportunity to escape. So
Yeah.
you have to always leave
Yeah.
openings
Oh,
for,
so important that allow people to leave, a face saver, right? Leave room for somebody to walk away gracefully, again, whether personally, professionally, or in crisis negotiation. And in some ways, I guess that's what the poor guy was trying to do, saying, just dye your hair blue, right? It was
yeah,
like,
just,
he's
yeah,
like, give me an escape,
give
Jane,
me a
please.
reason. Give me a reason. Yeah, exactly. And,
Give-
I saw him, oh my God, 20 years later.
yeah.
And he was, and he was like, oh my God, do you remember that time at the barrier? And,
Oh, wow.
and when we
Yeah.
asked you to dye your hair blue, I still remember that, and la la
Uh,
la.
that's
It was
neat.
comical, even years later,
Yeah.
you know. But
But
yeah,
also, obviously, you had a positive impact because he remembered it. He was able to laugh about that situation, which could have gone very differently. And just quickly tell, in terms of confidence, like confidence is so important in negotiations. Do you have any advice or tips for our listeners on how to calm your nervous system and be able to show up with confidence when the stakes feel really high?
fake it till you make it.
Yeah.
Like, you
That's
know
true.
what I mean?
Yeah.
It's so true. You
Yeah.
have to, it's funny, the show Grey's Anatomy,
Yeah.
there's one of the characters talks about how before she does surgery, she does the Superman pose where she
Yeah.
takes a moment and and there's truth to that. If you
That's
just take a
absolutely.
moment and you just, you know, square your shoulders,
Yeah.
chest out, lift your chin and, hands on your hips and just
Yeah.
feel the power. And,
Yeah.
and, you know, but
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, we're all faking it.
Yeah. Well, and they've actually done studies on that. And like, oh my God, Amy, what darn it, her name's not coming to me now, but the one she did a TEDx talk about the power poses, right? Like putting your
Yeah,
hands behind your back, leaning back, feet
yeah,
up, or hands on like the Wonder Woman pose, is it, or whatever. And it shows the cortisol levels and that change. People actually feel more empowered just doing that for, 30 seconds or whatever. It was
yeah.
remarkable to see
Yeah.
the
So I,
results.
I, I still remember that, the Superman pose. But yeah, I mean, you can't go in thinking that you're going to be defeated.
Yeah.
You have to believe in what you're doing and you have to be confident. Otherwise, you're just wasting everyone's time.
Yeah. I love that. And what would you say, I guess, sort of wrapping up, what are the key skills or hallmarks that make, and you've talked about obviously some of them here, but if you were going to sort of cap off, what are the things that you think make for the most effective negotiators? What would some of those be?
Active listening
Yeah.
is number one.
Yeah.
Um, Information gathering, you need to
Yeah.
be aware. People give things away and you need to
Yes.
watch because that just might give you what you need to sort of get in there. And if you don't build rapport,
Yes.
so
Uh,
oftentimes at the beginning, once you've listen to their stance and, because the first thing they want to do is be heard,
yeah.
but then you start talking and try to find common ground, try
Yeah.
to find something, and you can't fake it. It
Yeah.
has to be something
Yeah.
because they can tell if you're faking it. Like, oh, the Blue
Yeah.
Jays are my favorite team in the world, and oh yeah, I love them too. And I've never watched a
And you know
baseball,
nothing about
but
them. Yeah.
yeah, you can't do that. It
Yeah.
has to, but yeah, you have to build rapport because if you don't have rapport, you don't have trust. And if you don't have trust, you're not gonna get anywhere.
I am loving this. Rapport is one of the core elements of my sort of negotiating templates, if you will. So I love that. And also want to really put a pin in something you said as well about that awareness piece, right? I think you said you've got to pay attention and see what's going on because that's information gathering. And so often we come from a place of ego and negotiations, and we're just focused on our needs and the point we want to make, the argument we're trying to drive. And when you're in your head and from a place of ego, you are not situationally aware. You're not picking up on tone of voice or body language or any of the multitude of clues that are out there that would help you find a better strategy or an outcome. So I love that. This has been fabulous. And Jane, I normally like to end by asking, what's one of the greatest mindset shifts that you've had in your life? Doesn't have to be about negotiations, not even related to this topic necessarily, but something that made you go, and show up differently in life.
I don't know. Life is ever evolving. It's always the
Mm,
the next chapter, the next adventure. I don't know about other careers because I haven't had any other one, but with corrections, I mean, I retired at the end of September
yeah.
and just trying to normalize has
Yeah.
been interesting
Yeah.
because, I was institutionalized too. I mean, we joke and say, I've got, 15 years in on life 35, you
Yeah.
know,
No, that's funny and true.
yeah, well, and we're locked in the same and our mindset and
Yeah.
certain, you almost have to put on this with your uniform, you put on this cloak of,
Yeah.
and compartmentalizing your life. And so, and it's amazing how quickly when you're not in it, that
Yeah.
it kind of now it seems like some reality TV show I watched. Like it's just,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
and half the stuff I don't even remember, and it'll
Yeah.
come to me. And I'm like, how could I forget that?
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it's I don't know. I think people constantly are changing and evolving based on
Yeah.
all kinds of things in their lives, whether it be like personal crises
Yeah.
or work, all kinds of things.
Yeah.
So
I love that message. I love that message, Jane.
I
On
don't think
so
I have
many.
a defining moment because it just
Yeah.
evolves.
Yeah. No, and I think, it's so important because when we have that perspective shift, I think I've never heard anybody raise that as their mindset shift. And it's such an important one because if we don't recognize that everything is going to evolve, everything is going to get changed, we get so focused on the little thing that's driving us crazy in this moment without realizing this is just one little blip in an evolution of our lives. I think that's a beautiful mindset shift. So where do you want people to learn more about you, Jane?
I have no I have no media presence. I have no uh,
Okay, well, do you know what we'll do? We'll make sure I know your book is going to be coming out. We can't wait for that. And we will make sure to promote when your book comes out. Such an interesting perspective you've got to offer. And thank you so much. This has been just a fabulous discussion with packed with so much valuable information that applies across the board. So thanks for joining us today, Jane.
thank you so much for having me. I enjoyed it too.
Yeah, and for our listeners out there, I often say about, hey, if you didn't catch everything, listen again. But this is one I just really encourage you to listen to this episode again and share this episode with other people in your life. Because even though, Jane was sharing with us her wealth of experience in high stakes, sort of crisis negotiation environments, but the principles that Jane has shared with us here today are a game changer at every level of your life, personally, professionally, all the spaces in between. So do give the gift of sharing. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't done that yet. And before we sign off today, just want to share some ways we can work together if you're looking to up-level your negotiation skills. I've got everything from online to group to my signature VIP and mastermind experiences to help you better leverage your innate power, and yes, you have it, to be able to get more of what you want and deserve in life. And if that sounds interesting, check it out at artoffemininenegotiation.com. Make sure to grab a copy of my book, Art of Feminine Negotiation, if you haven't done that already. And that is a wrap for this episode. So until next time, go forth and negotiate your best life on your terms so you can stop missing out and start getting more of what you want and deserve from the boardroom to the bedroom. Until next time, take care.